And then he says, "Oh my god, a talking muffin!"
You're right, that was a good one. Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Area, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in the Season 2 premiere of Loki. I cannot wait to break this episode down for you, all the hidden details, and explain what the heck is actually going on here. Plus, we have a couple theories about how the episode gave us a big clue about how this season is going to end and set up Avengers Secret Wars. So, welcome to our coverage of Loki. If you watched this for a while, then you know that Loki is a very special show for us here at ScreenCrush. It's the show where a lot of you found our channel and helped us build this channel into what it is today. So, to celebrate the show, we have designed some brand new Loki merch at our merch store at ScreenCrushMerch.com. This season, we have introduced this Variant Suspects t-shirt, a police lineup with your favorite time-traveling variants from movies and TV, the Miss Minutes Dolly Clock to express the destruction of the TVA, Doug as Loki shirt and mug.
I do not endorse this product.
That's enough, Doug. And also this super sweet Variant sweater with a variation of the logo to make it look like a ScreenCrush VHS tape. Shopping our merch store is the best way to directly support our channel. Thanks for watching. Let's dive into this episode. First, let's just talk a little bit about the full Marvel Studios intro, which changes a bit with every MCU movie or show, but they didn't show the full intro in the show's Secret Invasion. This new intro includes several shots from Endgame, Jane from Thor Love and Thunder, She-Hulk, Black Widow, and He Who Remains. And there's actually no inclusion of the most recent Marvel projects from 2023, which is kind of unusual. Okay, so Loki Season 1 left off on this massive cliffhanger.
Oh yeah, what happened again?
Okay, very brief recap of the whole season. The Loki who stole the Tesseract in Avengers Endgame was arrested by time cops called the Time Variance Authority, and it's their job to police the timeline and enforce something called the Sacred Timeline. They do this by preventing people from branching reality off on a different path. So Loki befriends Owen Wilson's Mobius. He's recruited to find a female version of himself. They team up, reveal the TVA is built on lies, and that everybody who's working there is actually a variant who has had their mind wiped.
I have no memory of having my memory wiped.
Loki and Sylvie fall for each other, and then they meet the man behind the TVA, a variant of Kang the Conqueror, the villain we met in Quantumania. He says that the Sacred Timeline only ever existed to make sure there were no variants of Kang the Conqueror, and that without him, there would be a multiversal war that would destroy the entire multiverse. Sylvie decides to kill him anyways, thereby creating the multiverse that we saw in Multiverse of Madness, What If, Spider-Man No Way Home, and Quantumania. Loki then returned to the TVA, where Mobius and Hunter B-15 did not remember him at all. So the final shot of last season was of the statue of Kang the Conqueror, and so this is where the season begins. This is going to be setting the scene for the entire season. It's all going to be about Mobius and Loki hunting down Kang, which actually opens up the question of, are they still doing what Kang wants? Do they have free will? And what the heck is actually going on here? I've got a theory about Kang and the TVA that I'm pretty excited to tell you about that I'm going to go over a little later in the video. Basically, I think that we've already seen the ending of this season in this first episode.
Hey man, just doing my manager duty here. How's your mental health doing?
You know what, Doug? It's much better. Thank you for asking.
Oh, what's wrong? You been having some troubles?
Yeah, man. With work, especially when we're covering two shows like Ahsoka and Loki at the same time, I get really high anxiety that manifests as nervous tics, I squint my face, I clench my jaw, and I hyperfixate on oral habits like stress eating. Now, there's actually a lot of ways to help me deal with those bad habits, but to kick my oral fixation and anxiety, I started using Fume. They're the sponsor of this video.
Oh yeah, is that a vape?
It is not a vape. It's not electronic, and it doesn't have pods filled with potentially harmful chemicals. Instead, it has these plant-based cores that are infused with natural flavors to create natural flavored air. I recently started using the sparkling grapefruit, and it even freshens my breath.
Smells very nice.
Thank you, thank you. You see, Fume uses plants and behavioral science to help you trade out your negative habit for a positive one. Plus, it has adjustable airflow and is designed with these movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, which gives you a lot to do, which is also helpful for calming your anxiety. See, Fume makes switching easy and even fun. They have thousands of 5-star reviews from more than 100,000 customers who have used Fume to change their lives, and they switched when other solutions just didn't work. So, head to tryfume.com/ScreenCrush and use the code ScreenCrush to save 10% off when you get your Journey Pack today. The Journey Pack comes with 3 unique flavors and everything you need to finally be free of your bad habit. That's tryfum.com and use the code ScreenCrush to save an additional 10% off your order today. Now, back to what I was saying. Okay, so Loki ran away from past Mobius and into one of these flying cargo cars that we actually saw in the distance in Season 1. Now, to me, it looks like this could be a Miss Minutes air freshener hanging from the mirror. Very cool. Loki causes the car to dent the statue of Kang, and then later, actually, Loki causes the timeline monitor to fall and crack the TVA logo. Now, we pointed this out last season, but the logo of the TVA actually seems like it was made to be the face of Kang the Conqueror. So, in a way, Loki damages two sides of Kang's face, imitating the scars on the villain's visage. Casey is buffing the floor, and actually it looks like in the past maybe he was a janitor, so maybe when we saw him in Loki Season 1, he has been promoted to a desk job. He's listening to a meditation audio tape, which we actually saw here in the closing credits. I also wonder if maybe he confiscated this Walkman from a variant variant of Star-Lord, mimicking how his Walkman was confiscated back in Guardians Volume 1. And then Loki starts to time slip. Now, we have a ton of theories on why he's doing this, and how Kang actually planned all this to happen, and how his own time slipping is caused by the ending of Quantumania, and we're going to explain the ending, all kinds of stuff in different videos. Too much to go over here, so subscribe, ring the bell so you don't miss it.
So wait, what even is time slipping?
Well, here's how they explain it in this episode. Time travel in the TVA is supposed to be impossible. The TVA exists outside of time, so the people who work there think that like all of time is basically happening at once. But in reality, He Who Remains most likely created the TVA, so to him it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, He Who Remains also has a temp pad, the device the TVA uses to access all of time and space. But his temp pad would be like the master temp pad, the one where he can actually go back and forth in time within the Time Variance Authority. Now, because Sylvie used this temp pad on Loki, she inadvertently gave Loki the ability of He Who Remains to slip back and forth across time inside the TVA. But in order to do that, a little bit of Loki is scattered across the time stream, similar to what might have happened to Kang at the end of Quantumania. Think of it like Loki is a bunch of tiny metal shavings that have been thrown into a haystack, and the haystack represents all of time. Mobius even describes time slipping like this.
Looks like you're being born or dying or both at the same time. It's freaking me out.
So in other words, all aspects of Loki suddenly exist at once. So the device that Mobius uses in this episode is essentially a magnet to pull all of those metal pieces of Loki back into one place. I also want to point out that when Loki time slips, he looks a lot like Scott Lang when he went into the probability drive in Ant-Man Quantumania.
Wait, what was the probability drive again?
Well, essentially, this is when every decision Scott could possibly make split off into another Scott, like the branches of the multiverse. In the same way, it's like we're seeing Loki exist in all places and times at the same time before he manifests in only one place and time. So this has happened to a couple different characters in the comics before. Doctor Doom's consciousness was split across the time stream after the 1984 Secret Wars comic. Very long story.
Now, we don't have time to unpack all of that.
But more importantly, Kang also spread Ravonna Renslayer across all of time and space.
Oh, like Ravonna in this show?
Yes, in the comics, Ravonna Renslayer is like the one true love of Kang the Conqueror, but he is cursed to never actually be able to be with her. Ever since her first appearance, she always dies before they can be together.
This is a bummer, man. That's a bummer.
In the distant future, Kang tried to fix this by scattering Ravonna's essence across the timeline, so she would essentially be resurrected in countless lifetimes, where she always still died or spurned Kang. Ravonna left last season to go search for the man controlling the TVA, and in this episode, we hear an audio recording of them together, where he drops a cute mention of the name of the studio.
Ravonna Renslayer, you are quite a marvel.
And this is also where they seem to come up with the TVA's motto.
For all time.
Always.
But more on that in a bit. Now, Miss Minutes is not doing anything to help the TVA in the present because remember, she secretly works for the real power behind the TVA. Now, whether that's He Who Remains or Kang, we just don't know yet. So then she and Ravonna went off to find this person with free will, the true creator, the true master of the Time Variance Authority. This episode expands on what we know about the TVA. It seems like the Hunters, like B-15, are like the TVA military, enforcing the law outside the TVA. But there is also a TVA police force led by General Dax, and X5 works for her.
Jeez, who named these characters? George Lucas?
Mobius meets the Minuteman who pruned him last season, and Mobius gives him a slight insult.
I guess you're just following orders. It's actually Renslayer who really owes me the apology.
I was just following orders as how the soldiers of fascist regimes like the Nazis have tried to justify their war crimes in various war crimes trials. So you may have noticed that triangles are a recurring image in this episode. There's triangles here in the hallway, a triangle table in the meeting room, and the doors are covered in triangles that form hourglasses and infinity symbols. But triangles are often seen to be a holy figure, representing the Holy Trinity, for example. In the end credits, we even see this symbol. Now this is very similar to a diagram of a summoning ritual, but it's also similar to a diagram of Nikola Tesla's 369 theory.
Oh, what's that?
Well, okay, Nikola Tesla was a genius inventor who believed that the numbers 3, 6, and 9 had a secret power, that they held the secret to understanding the universe. Basically, Tesla thought that the universe had some kind of code he could crack, and this formula was the key. Einstein theorized about something similar called the unified field theory. This was a math formula that would explain everything from the smallest atom to the largest galaxy. So I don't think this figure is randomly chosen for the end credits, because elsewhere we also see Schrodinger's equation that predicted the behavior of quantum particles.
Wait, so what's that?
Okay, so basically a mathematician named Schrodinger, the cat guy, worked out a way to predict the movements of subatomic particles, and it showed how these particles would move as waves. I bring this up because in theory, if you can predict the flow of atoms, you can predict the flow of everything, which would allow Kang to build a machine that predicts the flow of the multiverse. And that machine would allow the TVA to know when a variant was going to cause the sacred timeline to split away. Now, we think all of this was set up in Ant-Man Quantumania, which again, we have to go over in another video because quantum physics makes our retention rate bottom out. So Loki enters the judge's chamber during a time when the TVA was ruled by a council of Kangs.
I have no idea what's going on right now.
Okay, so stay with me, buddy. He Who Remains told this story about how he and the other Kangs started off just as scientists who discovered the multiverse.
Naturally, they made contact, and for a while, there was peace.
But then some of them got greedy and they wanted to conquer all realities. Now at first, these Kangs worked together and they formed a council of Kang variants that we actually saw in the post-credits of Quantumania. So the TVA, like in the past, was used by this council to control the timelines of the multiverse. But then, He Who Remains went to war against the Council of Kangs because he thought their actions were going to destroy the multiverse. This is also a lot like the Kang who we saw in Quantumania, who was banished to the Quantum Realm. We have theorized in the past that He Who Remains and Kang are actually the same guy. Anyways, He Who Remains defeated the other Kangs and then took over the TVA, creating the myth of the Timekeepers to keep order and pruning all timelines to prevent his other variants from ever existing. So that's what we know. Like I said, lots of theories we're going to go over in other videos. Then we go to the TVA trying to figure out what the hell is happening as they look at the decapitated robot head of their false god. And you know what? All my gods are actually terrible is a running theme of the multiverse saga. We've got some stellar new additions to the cast this season with Kate Dickie as General Dox, and it looks like she's leading a military coup of the TVA following the destruction of everything they hold dear.
This changes everything.
This changes nothing.
And this new judge is comedian Liz Carr, who has appeared in The Witcher and Good Omens. Now the judge and general tried to maintain order as it's always been, but then Loki time slips in to reveal the tiled mural of the TVA is actually hiding the Council of Kangs. And notice the sound effect when he does this. It sounds a lot like the sound effect of the THX logo. Maybe because both of them are offering crystal clear clarity to the audience.
Were you getting paid by THX or something?
Nope, just reaching. After the judge rules the TVA must stop pruning, Loki and Mobius finally catch up, and Loki's ego won't let him admit that Sylvie beat him in a fight.
I'd ask who won, but
It was a draw.
And this is just like last season, where he refused to believe that any Loki could be better than him.
I'm sorry about not calling some faded photocopy of me Loki.
And I thought this next line was very sweet.
Renslayer kicked me down some steps too.
Because Mobius knows that Loki had feelings for Sylvie, and by equating that with himself, he's basically admitting that he had feelings for Ravonna. Now, they always had a friendship, but he never actually acted on his feelings.
Friends against time. Allies to the end.
The elevator scene was also great for this Wes Anderson-esque deadpan.
It's not that bad. I can handle it. How does it look?
Then we meet the best new character on this show, Ouroboros, played by Ki-Hoo Kwan, who just won an Academy Award for starring in 2022's greatest movie about the multiverse, Everything Everywhere All at Once. So his name, Ouroboros, is named after an ancient symbol of a snake eating its own tail. Now this idea has appeared in various forms in ancient myths across the planet. Essentially, it means that the end of something also creates its beginning, like if you traveled back in time to have sex with your grandma and became your own grandfather.
If she's my grandmother, who's my grandfather? Isn't it obvious? You are!
Ew, humans do that?
In some countries, yeah, it's encouraged. Anyways, I think this concept of Ouroboros is going to define this season. We see that OB is surrounded by loops and circles, circular lamps, circular doorway, and his only communication with the outside world is through these pneumatic tubes. Tubes that are a lot like the individual timelines of the sacred timeline. Now, Ki-Hoo Kwan is perfect for this role because, like, he radiates positivity, and he should be the most miserable person in the TVA.
How long has it been?
400 years. Believe it or not, he was my last visitor.
But he just loves what he does.
So I just keep at it forever. No sleep.
So in our Avengers Endgame breakdown videos, we talked about how the MCU did not follow the time travel logic that we are used to. In that movie, changing the past simply creates a branching timeline. Now we're used to movies like Back to the Future, where traveling to the past results in an altered timeline that can erase your own existence. But now in this show, we see that the time-slipping Loki can actually affect the past of the TVA. He tells past OB about time-slipping, so he'll invent a machine to help him.
Which is really Bill and Ted time travel logic.
Actually, you're right.
We'll time travel back to 2 days ago, steal your dad's keys and leave them here. That way, when we get here now, they'll be waiting for us. See?
Now, this whole scene with Obi is what makes me think that Kang is still pulling Loki's strings, and I got proof that I'm going to talk about a little later in the video. And real quick, the thing here on the counter is a vintage vacuum cleaner, appropriate for a guy who spends his entire life surrounded by vacuum tubes. Also notice that Obi's uniform has 3 circles on the chest, like the symbol of an Ouroboros. So the magnet that Mobius is going to use is called a temporal aura extractor, and a temporal aura is basically like a mugshot that shows what timeline you came from. Remember, Loki had to walk through an aura reading machine in episode 1 last season.
What's that? Your temporal aura.
Now, we've gotten a lot of questions about what the heck a temporal loom actually is. As we explained during season 1, the sacred timeline is really several timelines that are woven together like strands of a rope. The temporal loom is a machine that brings all of these timelines together into one coherent sacred timeline. And I think there's also something going on here with black holes. OB says,
Have you heard about how if you fall into a black hole, you turn into spaghetti?
So he's saying that when Loki is scattered across the timeline, it's like entering a black hole. And the opening of the season 1 finale implied that the timelines all exist inside different black holes. In fact, time slipping looks like this same spaghettification, meaning that every time Loki time slips, he's getting ripped apart a tiny bit, as if he was entering a black hole. There's even a real book in the end credits called Black Holes, End of the Universe, which could mean that black holes will simply someday swallow up all matter in the universe, but also End of the Universe also implies that black holes could be the border of a universe because they allow you to enter different parts of the multiverse. So Mobius draws the word skin in dust, which is funny because dust is largely made of human skin cells.
Ew, humans are gross.
Dude, I have seen you throw up a bird and then eat it.
Continue.
Now, you may not understand all the weird timey-wimey stuff in this episode, but hopefully you understand the personal stakes. Mobius doesn't want to have his skin peeled off. General Dox is arming up the TVA to get Sylvie. We see her troops loading up the reset charges, which means that they're going to go out and prune timelines against the order of the judge.
Tell the TVA to stop pruning.
Essentially, a TVA civil war is starting. So Loki slips to the future where he sees Mobius's dust drawing, very similar to how Mobius left rings on Ravonna Renslayer's table last season.
Those rings are already there.
And they're all from you.
And now this has us wondering how many of those rings were left there by Mobius before his mind was even wiped.
I don't know you.
Mobius' spacesuit is actually more like an old diver suit, and notice the recurring triangle here on his faceplate and the dent in the face, similar to the dent in the face of the Kang statue. Now I like how the TVA is so into branding, they actually wrote their logo on the outside of this place, even though it's like next to a complete death trap. Loki goes into the hallway and finds the golden elevator of the Timekeepers, where the Timekeeper robots were kept last season. And then Sylvie reappears as Natalie Holt's beautiful theme plays.
There you are.
Now this is appropriate because technically He Who Remains left Sylvie in charge of the TVA, so she emerges back into the TVA, exiting from the chamber of their rulers, the Timekeepers. And then Loki is pruned.
Well, who pruned him?
Well, that's actually the big question of the season that we're going to talk about in our Ending Explained video. But I will say that you can see this figure lurking behind him. So I think this whole season might end up being like a big Ouroboros, where the last episode is actually setting up the first episode. So Loki might be pruned by future Mobius, future Sylvie, or even future himself. In fact, there's another clue about this whole season being an Ouroboros when Dox tells X5,
The Timekeepers are fake, but their warnings were real.
So who warned them? Maybe it's a future version of themselves. And also there's how Loki seems to give OB his nickname.
May I call you OB?
OB? I like that.
And he does this so OB could tell him his nickname again in the future. Again, we need a whole other video to dive into that, so we're going to do that in our Ending Explained video. But also I want to tell you, we go very deep on this topic and many others on our TikTok and IG Reels, where we always make original videos and theories that they don't let us share on YouTube. The links for that are below. Thanks for following, and let's get back to the breakdown. But before I get to the end credits scene and those theories, I want to break down the posters we saw in this episode and go through all the clues in the end credits. So let's look through all this fine print, shall we? In the cafeteria, we see minimize chit-chat in cafeteria and the timeline won't wait for seconds posters, which encourages people to keep their meals short, but also implies the timeline cannot wait even for a fraction of a minute. This one reads, catch a nexus, prevent a red line, and this one says the timeline is only as strong as its weakest moment. Pneumatic tube etiquette, meaning don't send things down like this banana with the prankster's repair request label. This one says temperamental TemPad, don't repair it too late. Again, notice how all the posters have some kind of reference to time, mentioning seconds or lateness, things like that. On the way to the temporal loom, there's this radiation poster that reads, "Read these instructions carefully," with a huge list of instructions and different confusing icons to represent separate aspects of the loom specs and warnings. And we see these same figures above the door to the loom. I love that there's no possible way anybody could read this and understand it.
I don't read, Benedict.
Here we see this one warns of imminent chronoton exposure causing spaghettification, and this poster has temporal loom safety protocols that show a person in Mobius's spacesuit getting their skin peeled away. It reads, "Life-saving protocol, exposure to extreme temporal energy will result in fatal corporal dehusking." Now rewind just for a second, where they mentioned chronoton radiation. Now a chronoton is a subatomic particle with temporal properties, and it does not actually exist.
Do you know that? It's important to me that you know that.
This is actually an Easter egg from Star Trek.
Causing it to discharge chronoton particles.
In Star Trek, usually when characters have time ships, they're powered by chronoton radiation. This was also used as a gag on Futurama.
Aren't those the particles that destroyed an entire civilization?
Good news, everyone! You're off to the Tempest Nebula to gather chronotons.
And this poster has a containment box that we saw a variant trapped inside in one of the trailers. Now let's run through these end credits, which have some subtle clues about what's happening in this show, some of which I've already talked about. We start with the Timekeeper's robot head because this was the event that set this whole season into motion when the TVA lost their gods.
The old gods are dead.
Next, Loki's mugshot along with his aforementioned temporal aura, which is like the TVA's fingerprints for tracking somebody across time and space. And we see some pages from the manual that OB wrote. Also, that manual has a leather cover that's embossed, almost like a Gideon Bible, appropriate since the workers in the TVA believe that by serving the TVA, they are serving their gods. I also think that this manual is going to become very important later in the season and basically be the Junior Woodchuck guidebook of the MCU. Speaking of books on the shelf, we also see Phoenix and Obsidian, a sci-fi novel about an eternal champion of the multiverse, and there's The Final Program, a sci-fi novel about a secret agent and a machine that merges people together to create the perfect being. Then we see the buttons of a coffee machine that we saw back here in the background, but I thought it was really funny that the coffee machine has an option for just TVA soup. Next to the Tesla 369 theorem I mentioned earlier, we see a poster encouraging people to stay in their cubicles to prevent the timeline from branching with a metronome in the foreground. Like the TVA, a metronome keeps time. It's also next to an apocalyptic event report like the ones that Loki and Mobius used to find Sylvie in season 1.
He's hiding in apocalypses.
This is the variant guide we saw in the end credits last season, and then dolls of the spacesuit to illustrate how to prevent Loki from time slipping. And notice that the crack in the TVA logo looks a lot like the fractured timeline. And then we get a few shots of the 1980s McDonald's where Sylvie ends up. This finger on the bell is from the library scene in season 1. This Miss Minutes poster says, "Behave or get your clock cleaned." I actually think she's still the one who's behind everything, by the way. I'm just going to slot that in as my theory. Now we also see a large board of post-it notes. This one mentions a re-echoed sound, multiple reflections of the same sound, much like Loki slipping through time and existing at all moments at once. These post-it notes also seem to be describing some kind of dream. There is imagery like a man stepping on moss-covered ground, space in the valley, pool of deception, dark mountains, the broken tree. And actually that one makes sense because the TVA talks about the timeline like it's a tree that they prune. So the broken tree is actually meaning the collapse of the multiverse. Then we see the chamber of He Who Remains. The walls mended with gold in the style of King Sugi, his chalkboard, and the time device that he used to show holograms and to slip himself through time.
Oh, swing of a miss.
Notice how up close this also looks like a split timeline. Then we see a book called The Zartan Contingent, a piece of fanfic about this villain from G.I. Joe.
Really?
No. And finally we get Mobius's jet ski magazine next to a confiscated sling ring. So maybe the TVA arrested a variant of Stephen Strange. After all, we learned this in Multiverse of Madness.
From our experience, the greatest danger to the multiverse, it turns out, is Doctor Strange.
And then we get the title card, which is made by a company called Perception. On their website, they describe the conceit of this design. One of Loki's most notable tricks is that he is a shapeshifter. In previous films, we have seen him turn into Odin, an Asgardian guard, and even Captain America. Within this series, we get to see even more versions of Loki and how different he can appear. Because of this, we designed the opening title for the series to pay homage to Loki's shapeshifting nature. The letters of the title shift through different fonts and text, all of which are symbolic and representative of Loki. Text from the previous film's title sequence and comic books that Loki has appeared in, alien typography from the series, and even Norse runes can be seen flickering throughout the logo until it finally settles on the main title. Which takes us to the post-credit scene in Broxton, Oklahoma. Now, that alone is an Easter egg. In the comics, for a time, Asgard was on Earth, like it is in the MCU, but instead of being in Norway, it hovered over a small town called Broxton, Oklahoma. Broxton has actually been mentioned in the MCU before in a flashback of Agent Carter.
Magnus Gully, Broxton, Oklahoma. Sounds interesting.
And now it's where Sylvie settles down in the 1980s. Notice that unlike previous visits to other timelines, this one specifies that this is a branched timeline. This is because when the TVA visited other timelines in the past, they always pruned them before they could truly branch. But now, with He Who Remains being dead, the timelines are branching out of control. She arrives moments after she kills He Who Remains. So this was her accomplishing her life's work, destroying the man that destroyed her life. And now she wants to experience everything that she's never been able to experience before. So when she arrives here and she looks around the room, she sees happy people, couples, families, living life. So she assumes that a McDonald's is a place where you can live all of your life at once. A lot like how Loki is slipping through time and experiencing all of time at once. She says,
"Not squirrel, not possum, not rats. Something that's already dead and nothing with a face."
Because she has lived her entire life in apocalypses, feasting on whatever was still alive in dead worlds. Then she's tempted by a brand new item.
Well, you can try our new chicken McNuggets, and we have a Big Mac.
And notice there's a cameo here from a famous 80s child actor in this scene. This person here is your mom. And then Sylvie says,
"I want to try everything."
And remember, she has the temp pad of He Who Remains. She can go to any timeline, anywhere, and even travel through time at the TVA. She's essentially the most powerful being alive. So now I want to get into like big theory time. On the post-it note board, there are a few mentions of Hex, including Hex Moment. So in Marvel Comics, Hex is associated with the Scarlet Witch's Hex power. And in the MCU, this manifested as the Hex in WandaVision.
What's a Hex?
Oh, it's what I'm calling the anomaly because of its hexagonal shape. It's starting to catch on.
What's that got to do with anything?
Well, basically, in WandaVision, the Scarlet Witch cast a hexagonal spell around Westview, which manifested as hexagons in the TV broadcast. Now, there were lots of clues. We went a little bit overboard.
Not the beast!
By the way, check out our Not the Beast t-shirt in our merch store. So here's where it gets interesting. In Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, we saw that the Scarlet Witch got her power from this interdimensional being called Chthon, who also manifests its powers as a hexagon. And the page about the Scarlet Witch in the Darkhold also showed a hexagon. And Wanda used the Darkhold to dreamwalk and travel between different timelines. So I think these simple post-it notes that mention Hex are about beings like Chthon, who can travel through timelines using Wanda's chaos magic. In fact, pay attention to this carving in Chthon's temple. It looks very similar to this drawing I pointed out in the TVA. Can't be a coincidence.
Not the beast!
So this is actually tying into the idea of incursions, like Reed Richards explained in Multiverse of Madness.
An incursion occurs when the boundary between two universes erodes and they collide, destroying one or both entirely.
Incursions were the main conflict in the 2015 Secret Wars comic book. The heroes had to actually destroy another universe to save theirs. Now, in the MCU, we have seen there are several different ways to pass through the multiverse. But some of these methods, like using the Darkhold, actually damage the fabric of the multiverse. We also saw Strange's spell damage the multiverse in No Way Home, and Ultron threatened it in What If. And I think that all of these threads are going to come to a head in Avengers Secret Wars, when all of these incursions will pit our MCU against the Fantastic Four and X-Men of Universe 838, resulting in a new, shared, combined Marvel Cinematic Universe. So that's how I think this first episode sets up Avengers Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars, but I want to hear your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.